Hello, my name is For Science. You can call me Jack or Prosner, whatever you prefer. Um, this is going to be part two of me doing my best to explain the storyline, specifically the original Aether storyline. I didn't really preface this last time, but I'm specifically only really going to explain the original Aether storyline. I'm not getting into Dark Aether, which is the storyline starting with Cold War. I'm ending it where the original Aether storyline ends in Black Ops 4. Yes, technically, Dark Aether is a continuation in some form, but I'm not getting into that because while I do find Dark Aether interesting enough, I don't really want to get into that because it's much easier for me to talk about a already completed and concise story. Um, so that's how this is gonna go. That's how this is gonna go. So last video, I got cut off right at the end because my phone ran out of storage. But where I was is I was getting into the after Origins picture. What's going on after Origins? So we're gonna start there because our four characters, Primus helps Samantha, and she ends up in a place eventually ends up in a place called a house with Maxis. Um, so what happens next? I'm gonna take a detour in a second, just because we're gonna have to, for story reasons. We're gonna have to take a detour. So the detour, I'll get into that. So after the events of Origins, our four characters, well, not all four characters just yet, but 3 out of 4 characters, Takio, Dempsey, and Nikolai, our Primus versions, arrive at the giant facility as original Ultimus Richtofen is sending Maxis and Samantha through the teleporter. So they're all like, "Stop! You can't do this! You can't do the teleporter!" All that. And what ends up happening is Richtofen's like, "Nah, fuck you guys," and does the whole shebang. And then what ends up happening is Primus Richtofen comes from the teleporter and busts a cap right in Richtofen's head. So Primus Richtofen killed Ultimus Richtofen. This creates something called a fracture, which is essentially... Fractures are weird. I don't know how this works exactly, but fractures are like offshoot timelines they're like offshoot timelines, and essentially they're just like it's just like the creation of alternate timelines. The most basic way I can explain that is they are basically just alternate timelines getting created. But where was Richtofen? So for our other 3 characters, Richtofen has been gone for a year. In this time, Richtofen has, I can't remember. He's helped Maxis. He has been setting out plans. I think this is more explained in the comics. I have not read the comics, so I do not know what happens in the comics. I need to read them at some point. But Richtofen ends up working with Victus, our 4 characters, our 4 boys from Buried Transit and Dire Eyes, boys and girl. And I think Richtofen gets a hold of the Chronorium, which is a book that that tells all that will happen and will ever happen. And he ends up being like, I know what must be done. That's one of the famous quotes. I forget where. I think that's written on the timeline. Richtofen writes, "I know what must be done," or something like that, along those lines. It's a pretty famous quote, at least in like the grand scheme of the story. But before Richtofen arrived at Doris, the giant facility, just called the Giant now in Black Ops 3, because we're in the Black Ops 3 game, we're going to start with the first map of Black Ops 3, Shadows of Evil. In Shadows of Evil, we have 4 characters. We have Jackie fucking Vincent, who is a detective. I don't remember some of the other characters' last names, unfortunately. But we have Jackie Vincent, who was a dirty cop. I forget his last name, but his first name is Floyd. He's a boxer. He's played by Ron Perlman. You have Nero, who is played by Jeff Goldblum. And I don't know the actor that plays Jackie Vincent, and the female character, I think her name's Jessica. But these four people, some stuff with zombies start happening. I don't know like the exact reasoning for this. I think it's because it's stated it's because of their it's stated that it's because of their sins, but that I think that's just a ploy. Because the person talking to them is this guy called the Shadow Man. And what ends up happening is that the Shadow Man, turns out Shadow Man betrayed him, and lets these things called apothecans. And apothecans are these weird like alien creatures. They're like ancient eldritch type beings. They have their own language, which people have translated. I don't know how you translate it, but some people have. But basically very Lovecraftian type horror type stuff. And basically the Shadow Man takes over Morgue City, where the whole thing is happening. And the four characters, they're like, oh, we gotta put a stop to this Shadow Man guy, and use something called the Summoning Key. The Summoning Key is this little ball, and they end up trapping the Shadow Man inside of the Summoning Key. And what ends up happening is after they've trapped the Shadow Man inside the Summoning Key, this keeper, this apothecary keeper's like, here you go, the Summoning Key, we've trapped the Shadow Man. He's like, haha. And then out of nowhere, Rick Toffin just comes out of a portal and just takes the Summoning Key. He's like, sorry, no time to explain. I have to go now. Thank you and goodbye, or however he says it. I probably misremembered some of it, but that's essentially what he says, and he just leaves. That is what happens. So, what happens after that in Morgue City, I'm not sure. They might all die. Who knows? Shadows of Evil is kind of weird, self-contained story to some extent. It's really interesting. There was a self-contained story that happened earlier, but I'm going to get into Mob of the Dead much later for reasons. Much like how I got into Classified before we got into Black Ops 4. Oh, okay. So after the whole mission at the Giant, Rick Toffin's killed his past self. Well, not his past self. Technically his future self, but not even his future self. There's an alternate version of himself. They're different versions of the same person. So he kills his other self at the Giant facility. And they end up making their way to a castle. I forget the name of the castle. It has an actual name. I forget it. But the map is called Der Eisendrache, which is the Der Eisendrache, which is the Iron Dragon. And they go there. And Rick Toffin's talking to this guy named Dr. Groff, who's on the moon at the moment. And Groff's like, oh, Rick Toffin, what are you doing here? The test subject is getting sent up. Yada, yada. So Rick Toffin and the boys start having to do stuff at the castle. While Dr. Groff is up at Griffin Station on the moon, which that's what the facility called. So I forget the name of the castle. I wish I could remember, because Der Eisendrache is a great map, but I forget the name of the castle that it takes place at. It's a real castle, believe it or not. It's actually a real place. And what ends up happening is Rick Toffin and the boys, they need the test subject that is getting sent to the moon. So they shoot it down. So they end up like sending the test subject down back to Earth, and it lands. There's an electrified barrier on the test subject, so they can't really do much about that. So they end up getting the golden rod of all things, because for some reason the golden rod was like with this test subject. And they do a little bit of weird time travel shenanigans, where they see in the past, get a code, unlock a safe, yada yada. And Richtofen and Dr. Groff are arguing. Dr. Groff is like, I will not let you do what you're going to do. And Richtofen is like, I have to do this thing. Because Dr. Groff is working with Ultimus Richtofen. Because they were scientists, and he was like, it's like, did the plan go well with Maxis? Yada yada. He's like, it's already been done, yada yada. Like, I heard you died. No, I am alive. And so what ends up happening is Richtofen, they use the goldenrod to and they start doing this thing that brings this keeper. This keeper goes up to the moon, terrorizes the moon a bit. And the reason they got to do this is because there's an electric field on the test subject that got sent down, and they need to undo the electric field. And the simple way of doing that would be shutting down Griffin Station entirely. So this keeper terrorizes the moon. Then our boys end up having to fight the keeper. The keeper actually teleports the MPD from the moon on into the castle. Because there's like a little pyramid area in the bottom of the castle. But it teleports the MPD, the moon pyramid device, all the way down to Earth. And they end up having to fight the keeper, which has been corrupted. And what ends up happening is they blow up the moon after fighting. They blow up the moon. Just like they blew up the Earth and moon, Dreisendrach, they blow up the moon instead. Which basically makes it so none of that can ever happen. The moon is blown up, Griffin Station is destroyed. And Richtofen needs to do some stuff with the test subject. Who is this test subject? Oh, it is none other than Ultimus Dempsey. Richtofen's like, I must do what must be done, and he like uses the power of the summoning key to lock our other three boys in place. And Dempsey's like, what are you doing, Richtofen? He's like, I have to do what must be done. And so what ends up happening is Dempsey ends up shutting the life support off for himself and killing himself. And, well, not himself, but the other version of himself, the Ultimus version of himself, or at least an Ultimus version of himself that may have existed in a fracture, and so forth. So, why did he need to do this? Richtofen does some weird stuff with the summoning key over Dempsey's body. And essentially he sucks Dempsey's soul into the summoning key. Because they need souls. So after Dreisendrach, they head to Japan. And they go to Zetsubo no Shima, which I think is Island of Despair, luckily. I think it's roughly Island of Despair. And they end up having to go to Zetsubo no Shima. They end up having to fight a giant spider and creating this thing called the K24. And they end up having to get some cogs to fix an elevator. And one of those cogs is received by blowing up a plane. This is real Easter egg steps for this map. This is not a joke if you haven't played it. This is what you have to do, essentially. What I'm explaining is fairly correct. And they have to, and they basically go and kill Ultimus Takeo, who is being held prisoner. And Takeo's like, what has happened? Why is this happened? How did you end up in this place, you know? And Takeo is a very, like, to give an idea, Takeo is very, very, like, devoted to his country. He is a very strong, very traditional Japanese man of his day. It's very, like, traditional honor type system. Still, because he's from that era before the end of World War II. He is very, very traditional. And he has a great respect for, like, the emperor and stuff. So Takeo is like, why has this happened? Why are you being held prisoner on this island? And it is revealed to Takeo that the Emperor had this happen, which has completely destroyed his whole worldview. Because it's like he was tested on by Division 9, which is essentially the Japanese group 935. Group 935 is German, Division 9 is Japanese. So essentially, Division 9 is like the Japanese version. Like, they do a lot of weird experiments. This facility that is a Division 9 facility where they experimented on plants and stuff, creating plant creatures, creating these giant, like, overgrown, like, spiders, like, which also in turn created that huge spider they had to fight. And so Takio's entire world view is broken, and he realizes, and he finally, and this is a big turning point for him as a person, I would imagine, and him and his other self. His other self decides to commit seppuku because he knows he has to die. And Takio helps him with that. You know, Ultimus Takio takes his katana, stabs himself, and then Primus Takio chops his head off. You know, traditional Japanese honor suicide. And Richtofen gets Takio's soul. And this is honestly there. I think this is each character death, I think, grants the other characters more understanding of Richtofen and more and I think over time they're starting to warm up and understand Richtofen more, because they're very much uneasy allies. They only go along with Richtofen because they have no choice but to go along with Richtofen. They don't know what they're doing. They have no idea what's going on. Takio, Dempsey, and Nikolai have no clue what's going on, and they're just going on this along with this crazy stuff, and they're having to kill alternate versions of themselves, which is it's very heartbreaking for them. So after this, they take a quick stop at Alcatraz, but we'll get to that quick stop at Alcatraz later. After they kill Takio, they head to Stalingrad, the map known as Grad Krovi, City of Blood. And Ultimus Nikolai is drunk and in a mech, and he's just fighting dragons. No joke, straight up, he's in this mech fighting dragons, and they end up helping Nikolai. They get him a bottle of vodka. They have to help this robot called Sophia, which was Max's secretary, who has been put into a robotic orb. And you have to do a bunch of these trials for her. And eventually they get Nikolai a bottle of vodka, and they help Nikolai, Ultimus Nikolai, kill a dragon. What ends up happening is they're like, we have to kill you. They end up kind of just staying this straightforward. We need you for the betterment of tomorrow. We need your soul. Ultimus Nikolai is not having it. He's like, no, drunk Russian man, you know. And they end up beating Ultimus Nikolai, and it's revealed in the conversation as before they kill Ultimus Nikolai. Primus Nikolai essentially reveals that his wife died in a battle. I don't know. I think it might have been the Battle of Stalingrad. There's also a weird thing where I think that they have memories of other lives because they're just traveling around the multiverse. So while stuff may have not happened, they still have these memories of other lives. I don't know exactly how this works, but essentially Nikolai lost his wife. And it is something that broke him very deeply. And that's why Ultimus Nikolai is a drunk. That's also partially why Ultimus Nikolai states on multiple occasions about different wives. He always talks about, first wife, this killed third wife. I killed third wife with this gun. There goes for the, Ultimus Nikolai is constantly talking about different wives because it's just kind of a running joke with them. He's this old drunk man who talks about his different wives. But it's revealed that his real wife died in a war because the homes got bombed or what. I forget the specifics, but his wife died. And it broke him, and he became a drunk because of that. And Nikolai retaliates, pulls out a gun on Ultimus Nikolai. Ultimus Nikolai pulls out a gun, Primus Nikolai shoots him, and Primus Nikolai just guns him down. Because it unfortunately had to be done. And like Tank and Takio are like comforting Nikolai, and Richtofen gets the soul from Ultimus Nikolai. Why did they need these pure souls? Well, it was for this being known as Dr. Monty, who is one of the two beings who is one of the oldest beings in the universe. He's played by Malcolm McDowell. So Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man are two beings from the beginning of the universe. They used to be very good friends and ended up becoming enemies. So Dr. Monty is like, we need these souls. These souls essentially need pure soul. They need souls from these characters. And what ends up happening is the souls of our 4 characters that they had to kill were sent to this place called the House, which is in its own place entirely. The House is really weird. I don't know like the whole like lore thing behind it, but Monty is trying to create his own little place, free from the corruption of the Aether and like all the dark Aether stuff. And so what ends up happening, they get to the house. Maxus gets corrupted by the Shadow Man. He releases the Shadow Man from the Summoning Key. Because the Shadow Man's been in there the entire time. And it creates this entire insane thing where it's like parts of all these past maps, and this is Revelations. This is the end. This is the final battle. And they end up working with Dr. Monty, Maxus, and Sophia from Garad Krovi to finally banish the Shadow Man. This happens. And Dr. Monty is like, you should not exist anymore. You should be gone, referring to Takio, Nikolai, Dempsey, and Richtofen. Why are they alive? Well, they're these little things, these little blood vials that are from a place called Mob of the Dead, or, well, not Mob of the Dead, they're from Alcatraz. And these are of prisoners from Alcatraz, these blood vials. For some, I don't know the lore reasoning exactly, but these blood vials kept our 4 characters from disappearing. And what ends up happening is like, oh, this works out perfectly, and sends our 4 characters back to the Great War, which is this very early part in the timeline where our 4 characters use the staffs from the original staffs, which the staffs were the Wonder Weapons of Origins. They were copies of the staffs in Origins, but these are the original staffs, and they use the staffs. It was basically a great war against humans and apothecans. And that's not the end. Because why would that be the end? This is a loop. From Origins to the end of Revelations, there is a loop that is constantly happening forever and forever. It's an infinite loop that constantly forces these events to perpetuate. The cycle perpetuates itself. And now we're going to talk about the cycle being broken. The breaking of the cycle that was created in Black Ops 3. And the breaking of the cycle begins when our 4 friends arrive at Alcatraz. For some reason, in this specific cycle, the Chronorium has changed. And the breaking of the cycle could be attributed to another cycle. I don't know how intertwined this cycle is, but there's another infinite cycle that was present elsewhere in the timeline. And I think this is where this whole cycles thing stems from. I may be incorrect. If I am getting like lore stuff incorrect, I apologize, but this is the best of my ability. So the map Mob of the Dead, we have 4 characters who are played by famous actors, but they're 4 mobsters at Alcatraz. Also, Richtofen has this facility under Alcatraz, which is a whole can of worms entirely that gets into crazy story stuff. Victus is being held there, cryogenically frozen after they helped Richtofen. So after the end of Zetsubou no Shima, they went to Alcatraz. They took a quick stop at Alcatraz, and what ends up happening is they're going to go grab the blood vials that they need to perpetuate the cycle. And Richtofen's like, my blood? What do you mean? And Richtofen meets with another version of Richtofen. The same Richtofen, obviously, just at a different stage in the time in the cycle. And Richtofen's like, hey, you figure it out. And Richtofen's just basically like, hey, you figure it out, okay? This is your job now. And what ends up happening is our 4 characters, instead of being able to just get the blood vials and leave Alcatraz, the Chronorium has changed, which is crazy, because it's like, whoa, the Chronorium is what told Richtofen how to perpetuate the cycle. But now the Chronorium's like, no, the cycle has changed. Oops. So Richtofen's like, uh-oh, how do I do this? And what ends up happening is they have to fight the warden of Alcatraz and chase down some stuff. Now, to get to our other cycle, our original cycle, Mob of the Dead. Sal DeLuca, Billy Handsome, Al Arlington Weasel, and Finn O'Leary are 4 mobsters. And to give you a basic summarization of the story of Mob of the Dead, they had an escape plan. Escape plan failed. Sal, Finn, and Billy killed Al because the escape plan failed, because he was the one that was leading it. So Al, Sal, Finn, and Billy are stuck in an infinite loop of their deaths, dying to zombies over and over again because of their sins. And the warden in the original timeline is the warden of Alcatraz. I don't know like how this has changed. It's really weird. They changed some of this stuff down the line. But essentially, the warden essentially is like, fuck this. I ain't dealing with this shit anymore. He's like, here, Al, I'm helping you. And eventually, on this final cycle of them all dying, the warden helps Al, Mr. Weasel, and he ends up defeating the 3 people who killed him. And they're the reason this loop is happening. And Al is freed from the time loop. He's freed from the loop. And this is symbolized by him becoming like a bird in Alcatraz instead of a ghost. So that's important in Blood of the Dead, which is when Primus has arrived at Alcatraz. And they're trapped in Alcatraz now. And they're like, what do we do? And end up getting help from the 4 Mob of the Dead characters as ghosts. At some point, it's basically they have to do all this stuff with ghosts, and they have to use the Chronorium to figure out the plan. And they get locked in a jail cell by the warden. They fight the warden, and the warden, I guess, just wants Richtofen's blood. So Richtofen gets in this machine, and it sucks out all his blood, which is kind of terrifying. And another Richtofen, who is the Richtofen that has seen the Great War, comes out from the cryopods down at the bottom. It was a secret cryopod. He comes out. He's like, draw, and they leave the other Primus Richtofen to die in this thing, and they teleport somewhere. And the Richtofen from the Great War gives Nikolai the Chronorium, and he's like, here. And Nikolai is now the new leader of the group. He has read the Chronorium. He knows what he must do. Uh-oh. So let's go back to Classified real quick. So after Moon, Samantha was plucked out of Richtofen's body. Our other characters got teleported down to Groom Lake in like the past. And they're being held hostage after the whole Moon incident. and they're being like researched, and they're held in captivity. And Primus comes in and is like, "Hello, Ultimus. We need your help. We need you guys." Not exactly like that, but that's kind of what they say. He's like, "We need your help," and they're like, "What?" And also, Richtofen's back in his body now because after helping, I guess, Richtofen in the Ultimus Richtofen helped Primus Richtofen in the comics because Ultimus Richtofen is stuck in a zombie's body now, and Ultimus Richtofen found his body again, touched his body, the soul went into his body, the soul in the zombie transferred into his body, and now Richtofen's back in his body, and they go to Camp Edward, which is Nuketown. This is the map out of Omega, and they need something. I forget. This is where I get super hazy for me, because I don't really remember what happens in these last two maps that well. They need something from Camp Edward, and they need it to put a stop to Dr. Monty. The reason they need to put a stop to Dr. Monty is Dr. Monty is trying to perpetuate the cycle, because Dr. Monty doesn't want to stop. He wants to survive. Because Dr. Monty is intertwined with the Aether and stuff. If the Aether is completely destroyed, he dies too. So he's like, I can't have that happen. So the guys are like, nah, we're gonna make that happen. And they get what they need from Camp Edward in Alpha Omega. They talk to this robot named Rushmore, this AI named Rushmore, Camp Edward. It's a whole thing. And they get the thing they need. And what ends up happening is they go to this place called the Frozen Forest. They get drunk. They have a party, and Victus are freed from their cryopods, and then go to the Siberian facility. And Ultimus Richtofen, is still able to communicate with Samuel Steelinger for some reason, just because he can. He's still got that. They've got that inseparable link. And they have to get something. They help this guy, this hermit in the top of this place, and they do all this bullshit. I think I don't know exactly what they're doing. I wish I remembered what this is. It sucks because this is where it gets really hazy for me, because it's been so long since I've really looked in the story. They have to do all this bullshit at the Siberian facility, which was originally called the Dead. Now it's Togdertoten, which is Day of the Dead of the Living, or Day of the Dead, or Day of the Living. I forget. Because the first map was Nocturne Toten, which was Night of the Undead, or whatever. Now it's Day of the Dead. And Victus does their whole shebang. And what they do is they're basically having to do this thing to basically just collapse the Aether on itself and send it away. And Nikolai, it's revealed that the plan is that to destroy the Aether, Nikolai and Richtofen and Dempsey and Takeo must all die. And Nikolai makes this sacrifice. All the other characters get poisoned and die. Ultimus Richtofen in a zombie form. Nikolai executes him. And Nikolai's like, gives Samantha the gun. It's like, this has to be done. And he gives this whole spiel. And he kind of says, a line that really sticks with me is, I forget how it goes exactly, but it's something along the lines of, you weren't just my allies, my brothers in arms, you were my friends. And that's the true, friendship. But it makes me a little sad because the story could have ended so much better than it did, and it ended in a way that was kind of sad. And that's just the way the story ended. And what ends up happening after basically Nikolai's done everything to lock the Aether in its own little bubble and trap it away forever. Samantha and Eddie. Samantha Maxis finally gets her freedom. And Eddie, the little kid version of Richtofen that was at the house, who was also with her earlier for story reasons, yada yada, they end up walking off into the great unknown. And that is the end of Aether, the original Aether storyline, poorly explained by me. So yeah, I will not be getting into the Dark Aether at this moment. Dark Aether, its main link is Sam. Sam ends up growing up in the new universe created after the Aether's been basically a universe free of the Aether, or a world free of the Aether. But it's not really gone. It's now the Dark. It's just everything's been banished into the Dark Aether, which eventually the new timeline Nazis start experimenting with again. But at least they did their best to at least our boys did their best to hide it away. Maybe they're out there living their lives like they wanted to. But yeah. It was really sad because at the Intogratone you hear them tell stories of like what they hope to do after everything's all said and done, the lives they want to live. And it's beautiful. And you know, people can say what they will about Call of Duty and all that. But the original Aether Zombie storyline is something really special, at least from a story perspective and the way it's written. It's really special, and I think it deserves a lot of respect, and I'm glad there are lots of fans to it. But it's a wonderful story of just craziness, and then a little bit more serious towards the end, a little bit more emotional. But it started out as this wacky side mode, this wacky story, and our characters ended up sacrificing themselves by the end to secure the betterment of tomorrow, free from the Aether and the darkness that resides within it. Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man banished once and for all, because neither of them were truly good. Neither of them were good at all. And yeah, that was me poorly explaining the original Aether Zombie storyline. Yeah, that's it.